Not yet. I'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
We are live on YouTube and live on Zoom.
Yay! All right. Welcome and good morning.
Not yet. I'll do it.
Excellent. Oh, I love watching that number and that list populate. Good morning. Good morning. We're so excited to have you here for the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy. We will begin soon, but please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, and do make sure that your comments are going to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see who is here in our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see a couple familiar names in there from some of our other presentations. I am honored and impressed by your stamina, and I hope that you are enjoying the series as much as we are. Good morning. Oh my goodness, Kentucky today. Excellent. I love seeing the different places that pop up. Welcome. Good to see you again, Armin. Hello, Evangeline. And where is Twin Rivers Unified? I remember seeing that yesterday. Hi, Miss Endo. Oh, it's always awesome when you see your kids' teachers in their Zoom room. Sacramento. Okay, excellent. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning. You'll hear me make this announcement a couple times. Welcome to the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy. We will go ahead and begin soon, but please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat and make sure it's going to all panelists and attendees so that not only the panelists can see it, but also the attendees in the meeting. And that's just that little blue box down by the word "to" in the bottom right hand of your screen. Excellent. Yes, it's so much fun when you see someone you know. Excellent. Good morning, Tracy. I'm trying to get through all the names. Good morning, Neil and Cynthia. We're so excited to have you all here today. I can always tell when I'm really excited to run a webinar because my earbuds keep popping out because I'm smiling too much. So this is a great start because they've already popped out twice. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started with just a couple of announcements as we see, attendees still start to trickle in, just so that we can start as close to on time as possible. Don't forget that a recording of this event will be available after today's presentation, and you can get that at the K-12 Academy website. Captions are available on this live stream here. You just have to go down to the bottom of your Zoom menu and click on live transcript. There will also be captions on the recording. This is a webinar format, so your video and audio are automatically turned off, but we'd love for you to use the chat to communicate with one another and our presenters. And then, just a quick plug for our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Brian is putting those in the chat right now. So please join us in those groups so you can keep updated on everything Lurie College of Education at San Jose State. So our presentation today is called Better Together, Partnering with Families and the Community for Student Success. And our speaker today is Chastity Alainu Alade, and she's the coordinator of community and civic engagement for the Fort Bend Independent School District. And as she said in the chat, she is joining us today from the hot state of Texas. And we are so grateful to have you here today, Chastity. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Becca, for inviting me to present to you all today. It's a good group to see 30 participants in here. I'm really excited to share just some words of wisdom and some nuggets that we've learned here in Texas in our school district on how to truly support our students. Are we ready for me to project?
Yes, we are ready to go. Awesome. So thank you so much. Yep.
All right, good day, everyone. The presentation is, I'm hoping it won't just be straight out set and get. I'm operating it in PowerPoint, but there's also a few interactives in Minty Meter. So if you have your phone on hand and you want to log in to minty.com and use this code as we go ahead and get started, again, there'll be a few interactive slides, which will be fun to really break the monotony of the traditional webinar and allow you all to interact with me, even though I'm here in a virtual space, essentially talking to you through my square. So if you could go ahead and log into Minty Meter, that would be really helpful. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So as Becca mentioned, today we're going to be talking about how to really bridge the gap between families and parents and the community in order for our students to truly be successful. I won't go into too much because she did introduce me. Again, I am from Texas. A little bit about my professional background because it's really important and how I'm able to do the work that I do. I was a former teacher. I taught social studies, middle school social studies for 8 years prior to becoming a social studies coordinator. And then ultimately now I'm the coordinator of community and civic engagement. And so I like to say that I get to live social studies in my new role by really being kind of boots on the ground in the community. In addition to that, I am a wife. I am a mom of 2 kids, and you'll hear a lot about Philip, who is my 6-year-old. Oh, sorry, he just turned 7 this week. My 7-year-old who is going into 2nd grade. Because his experiences have really fed my experiences during this past year. And then I'm also a community advocate. I'm really involved in the community, not only in my job role, but in our neighborhood and our small extended community, whether it's on the homeowners association and the PTA. So I really try to make sure that I'm involved as much as possible. So that's just a little bit about me as we go in. Today, you'll hear me talk a lot about lead learners. I like to use that word because I truly believe in the importance of reflective practice as an educator and being centered on the idea of continuous improvement. Every day there's something that I can gain. And so regardless of if you're a kindergarten teacher, a middle school teacher, high school, even if you're an administrator, K-12 or an administrator in higher ed, I think one of the goals is to really be involved in continuous improvement and reflective practice with the understanding that there's always something that we can learn to get better. So I'll use
Chastity.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you flipped over to your PowerPoint, but right now we can just see the Minty Meter slide.
Let's try to do it.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Did you get a new share?
Yep, I can see the PowerPoint now.
Perfect. Does it say lead learners?
Right now I see slide 1, which has the Minty Meter slide. I think you're probably on slide 3, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Let's see. I should be on slide 3. Let's try a new share. My apologies.
No worries.
How about now, Brian?
Right now we can see it like in the preview screen on PowerPoint, but we can't see it full screen.
Let me do this. Let me stop sharing. Can everybody see me at full screen? Awesome. And then there we go.
Awesome.
How's about now?
Yeah, looks good.
Awesome, great. All right, perfect. I love it when there's another person in the room that can chime in. All righty, so again, about the lead learners, there are 3 objectives for today. These are our outcomes for you to walk away really understanding the role, evaluating the role that parents, families, and community engagement plays in creating a classroom and a campus culture. Determining some effective methods of engaging parents, families, and the community to promote student success and their overall well-being. That's going to be really key. And then lastly, we want to understand the value of communication and collaboration with our parents and families when addressing current issues in education. All you'll need for this session is literally a sheet of paper to engage in some reflection. We'll have a few questions every now and again, and so you'll just need to be able to jot a few things down. All right, so this is our first slide of Minty Meter. I want to kind of, pick your brains here. In thinking about this past year, I call it the pandemic year, I want to know which path best describes your journey through the school year. We have at the top a walk in the park. Then we have a dirty, muddy road. We have an uphill trek. And then lastly, we have a snow-covered, frozen over path. So if you could go into Minty Meter and identify this particular page, I'll go ahead and make sure that everybody has it up. It's a little bit of toggling. There we go. And enter your responses. So I have a muddy track. Make sure you have about 250 words. So if you want to give me a why, that would be awesome as well. I like that it was challenging but rewarding at the same time. Awesome. I'll take about 10 more seconds if anyone else cares to share. I have some people who responded in the chat as well. So we have a muddy track, uphill trek. Awesome. Definitely a few slides off of the road. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you all for participating in that little activity. I see a lot of us have had an uphill journey, some muddy tracks, and a few snowy paths along the way. I'm interested if there's anybody who felt that it was a walk in the park. We can talk about that in the Q&A session. All righty. So coming back to where we were. Brian, are you able to see my share?
Not yet. Right now we just see you. Oh, here we go. That's populated. Yep. Perfect.
As for me, this is the road that describes my experience. And I cheated a little bit because I know that had I added this to your options, many of you may have picked this one. And let me tell you a little bit about why. I'm not sure about you, but I feel as though this past year, I was always on a fast, super speeding highway, sometimes going a million different directions, and other times going fast to what felt like nowhere. I was at home as everyone else was, working full time, with my husband at home, working full time, with Philip, the 6-year-old at the time, who was in first grade, and Abby, who's 4, who really never went to school very much in her little short life. And so that was a really challenging time for all of us, as it was for everyone else. As the former teacher in me, though, one of the things that I really paid attention to were the struggles of my son's teacher, Mrs. Silva, bless her heart. I noticed early on that Mrs. Silva struggled in the school year. All of her kids were, again, babies, they're 6 years old, adapting to the new environment, working at home, having to adapt to technology that they might have used minimally before. The teacher was really trying her best, but it was evident that, the learning management system was new, and that there hadn't been much training on how to truly engage students, really be engaged, right? Using technology. It was a very intimidating experience for her, because not only was she trying to get into a groove with a class of 30 6-year-olds online, but also the notion of parents are watching. Parents are watching, they're listening at all times, and she's trying to, pivot throughout her instruction. And so I paid close attention to that, and I put my teacher hat on many occasions. But then also I noticed parents, and lots of parents would reach out to me, because they know who I am, and they know I work in the district and my role. And so parents were often very impatient. Lots of them were uneducated on how to use the technology themselves, and really felt lost and confused early on in the process. As for the school, they were scrambling for resources and desperately attempting to really get communications home. It felt like every time they press a send button, it was just lost amidst a pool of other emails and communications coming out, whether it was about the pandemic or other, things going on out here. This year was a grand experiment for us all, but one of the highlights was really being able to see my son's teachers grow as teachers, and really be able to help the school and the schools around me in figuring out innovative ways to really engage parents and engage the community. So essentially, that's what I'm here to talk to you a little bit about. Before we get into some really solid tips and strategies, I have 2 opening reflection questions. I believe Brian put a link to a handout if you want to use it digitally. Otherwise, you can just jot your thoughts down on paper. The 2 questions, the first one is saying, what are some ways that parents, family, and the community impact your work as a lead learner? What are some ways that, again, that interaction impacts your work? And then what are some ways that lead learners have communicated or engaged with parents, families, and the community? I want you to think about this in like a T chart. Jot down ways that were used pre-pandemic, right? And then also think about some of the ways that sort of emerged during the pandemic and that kind of persisted. And I say beyond because everybody's point of view or where they are with the pandemic is a little different. I'm in Texas. And so if you come to Texas, I'm sure it looks very different than if you were in California. So I just put kind of pandemic and beyond because we're all on a different point on the spectrum with that. But if you can just think about your answers to those 2 reflection questions, I'll set a timer for about a minute. Alrighty. Well, the first question, again, this is just your own personal reflection. Everybody's response will be different. If you didn't have an opportunity to answer that question because you really couldn't think of, some really concrete ways hopefully by the time we get to the end, we'll be able to revisit that question. And then ultimately in the question and answer, we'll be able to share some ways that families, parents, and communities impact your work. It's also important to note that I use the terms parents and families interchangeably, because I know where we are in Fort Bend ISD, but also across the world and the nation, that family dynamics look different in every household, and not all kids have parents per se. They may have guardians. And so I use those terms interchangeably. So just kind of think about that as we go along. So let's talk about pre and post pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, normal modes of engagement, were the standard phone calls, emails, physical face-to-face events that took place at the campus, whether it was open house, assemblies, and then we have, the PTA meetings or any sort of parent teacher events. Again, face-to-face, where people have to be in the building. And so that's kind of how we operated prior to the pandemic year. And then as we moved into the pandemic year and beyond, we saw some new strategies and innovations take place. For example, for me, the idea that a teacher would be texting me back and forth, I would have never thought about that prior to the pandemic. But during the pandemic year and beyond, like, I received text messages and instant messages from my son's teacher in his school daily, sometimes multiple times a day. And that became a new routine. Also, a learning management system. Prior to the pandemic, some districts had learning management systems, but they were kind of just using it as an auxiliary resource. Well, during the pandemic, if you had a learning management system, whether it was Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom, that became your primary point of facilitating instruction. And districts who didn't have one already in place really, really struggled. For parents, a lot of parents were like, what is a learning management system? And now when I talk to parents about, what were some of the successes of the school year, 9 times out of 10, most of them say having Schoology and that platform to engage with their students. And then lastly, we know the virtual meeting space, whether you're using Zoom, Teams, or Google Meet. There's all sorts of online platforms that allow the opportunity to engage face-to-face that don't necessarily require in-person interactions. So these are all sort of new things. What's really important as we kind of think about parent and family and community engagement is the idea that it shouldn't be a pre and a post. What we really, our challenge is to merge the practices of pre-pandemic and with the practices of post-pandemic to create a more robust environment that facilitates communication with our parents and all of our stakeholders, really. We've learned a whole lot. So I'm going to provide a few strategies that I've either personally experienced or tested out, that I've worked with teachers and focus groups. We've collected a lot of data through surveys in our district about what worked during the pandemic and what parents hope to see post-pandemic. And so some of my findings and the information I'm presenting to you today is based off of that. And it's really going to center around 3 big concepts. We have communication, collaboration, and compassion. With these 3 actions in place, lead learners can truly influence how parents view their role or their job in their child's learning. The goal is to make parents feel confident about their ability to truly help and support their children. Ultimately, we want parents to feel like they're part of the learning environment and that they're welcome to join in as partners in learning for their children. When we think about communication, again, there's lots of little cliche statements in here. Communication is the key, right? As lead learners, we need to make sure that we are encouraging and maintaining regular interaction between the school and families. This comes in a bunch of different forms and fashions, and I'm going to go through some of them in a second. Then there's collaboration. This is the one where a lot of people scratch their head and I'm like, well, I didn't think about it that way. Collaboration is the idea that parents in the community have an active role in the campus and in the classroom environment. This really allows the school to take on a culture that creates a community, develop caring relationships where parents aren't just passive bystanders, but they're actively involved and they have a voice. And then lastly, compassion. When I say compassion, it's the notion about being caretakers of one another. Not only are we exhibiting care, but we're really making efforts to resolve conflicts proactively. At the end of the day, all parents are the experts of their own children, right? And we have to remember that. And as lead learners, we want the parents to feel that their children and them as parents are safe and secure, not just in the terms of the physical building, but emotionally, psychologically, etc. The goal is for us all to feel treated with respect and to be honored. So I'm going to talk first about parents, and then after I talk about parents, we'll go into talking about the community. Again, we know that families come in a variety of makeups, and that's really important for us to take into consideration. What's also important is to understand that many parents were educated by teachers, such as myself, who were employed with 20th century pedagogy and methodology, right? Like we were taught a different type of way than our children are learning today. And that's a big struggle for parents who don't have an educational background. They don't go through the PD like we all do. They don't typically know all of the innovative and the new best practices in education. And so, especially during the COVID year where parents are watching the instruction and they're listening to teachers, you know, even we've had conversations in my household where like, well, that's not how we learn math, right? And so we're challenged here as we enter like the quarter mark of the 21st century. Technology is kind of the way of really getting into our kids, getting to our kids, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's at home. It requires a degree of education on the parent side as well as the students. So I'm going to break it down into three kind of subtopics: instruction, behavior, and culture, on how we can help our parents to have a deepened understanding of what education looks like and how we truly interact with our students and what they need to do to be successful. So again, instruction has changed. I taught social studies, and so I always told my social studies teachers that, you know, no longer is the teacher the keeper of all knowledge. Kids have Google. Information is at the tip of their fingers. So as teachers, our goal has shifted from being the content expert to being the expert on how to really facilitate rich learning experiences. And parents, again, have to understand that. It's not about the amount of homework that's assigned or the number of tests and quizzes that are given, but it's truly about measuring student success. With that comes the technology factor, right? Teachers have had a lot of learning to go through in order to be caught up to speed on how to really engage students, how to use the different platforms, how to make learning as robust as it possibly can. And that's had a huge impact on education as a whole. You know, we don't need desks and rows anymore to really facilitate instruction. We can do it through Zoom squares, our breakout rooms, and learning is no longer limited to the physical classroom space. And so that's another shift that we need to make parents aware of. Again, behavior expectations have changed. The way we respond to students and their social emotional well-being has changed. And so again, making sure our parents are aware of our practices in the classroom is really important. And then lastly, in dealing with so many of the current socio-political issues that we face in our nation and in our own communities, really making the school a community within itself where we try to, you know, put forth our best effort to develop character, cultural competency, and citizenship. That's really important because it shifts the mindset of parents of a school is a place where I just drop my students off to gain information, to learn, versus a school is a place where I'm bringing my students to blossom and grow as whole individuals. And those are the three components I'm going to touch upon in just a second. So the first one is instruction. Again, if you downloaded the PDF, Brian, you might want to put the link again in the chat for those of you who didn't get it the first time. All of this is there. These are some strategies and suggestions based off of, again, my interactions as a community engagement specialist, talking to parents about what's worked during this previous school year. Also, as a person who's extremely invested still in the curriculum and instruction side of the school district, and talking with teachers about what worked and what didn't work. So here are a few tips and strategies when it comes to instruction and digital learning. So the first thing is, we need to make sure that parents have information in time and real time as often as possible. That is a practice that I know improved. We actually took a survey and we saw about a 5% improvement from this previous school year from the year ahead of that. Parents felt like communication was actually better during the pandemic year than it was in the year prior. And so we want to make sure that we continue that practice. If you're not using an app like Class Dojo or Remind, I encourage you to, if you're a classroom teacher and you don't have it, ask your principal, ask your administrators, like, can we get that? That was a huge asset because it sent me classroom reminders all day long. I could message the teacher and we had constant communication, which was very important. My son also liked it because they got rewards and stickers and badges. And so that was fun for him. The system of newsletters and weekly emails, that sort of weekly communication with parents, again, is super important. It existed prior to the pandemic, and I feel like it got better during the pandemic. They included more information than what we previously received. And again, now you have the opportunity to not just put it in a folder. As my son in kindergarten, he just got his little newsletter in a folder as a paper. Well, now the newsletters were coming home digitally and print, and it was super helpful for me as a parent to be able to keep that information. The last bullet on communication is super important. Flipping and front loading, right? And so let me explain the difference between the two. If you're familiar with blended learning strategies, flipping is the idea of providing students with resources and assignments, like learning tasks, ahead of the direct instruction portion of the lesson. It really sort of fosters that individualized learning where you could, scaffold resources, provide some differentiation, but then the students engage in it in a self-paced manner when they come to class sort of with a foundation already laid. This was really, really helpful in working with Philip's teacher and thinking about how she could flip some of the learning. What could she provide them ahead of the lesson so that way when they came to class the next day or in a few days later, they already had some background knowledge, even if it's like vocabulary, knowing some of the key words they were going to interact with in a reading ahead of time, or math, having them struggle and do some math practice ahead of her actually teaching the concept. Philip actually, he viewed that sort of like a little challenge. He really enjoyed it when it was like a learn this before you learn this activity. The second bullet of front loading is really more of an instructional practice for parents than it is for students. And it's similar to the idea of an agenda or a weekly outline, but it's providing parents with either a list or an outline of topics that are going to be covered in the next upcoming week or few days. So parents are aware of the topic. They're also made aware of any potential misconceptions that might present themselves in the lesson, so the parents can assist in sort of setting those straight. For me personally, I really enjoyed when the teacher sort of front loaded and said, hey, next week we're going to be learning about the water cycle. We're going to be learning about this in math. And she provided us with the standards that it aligned to. So then I, as a parent, could find resources or take my son to the library to find additional materials so he can sort of flip the instruction on his own. So he went into the class having some schema about what he was going to learn about. So those two are critical for me, and I really hope to see that be integrated into the learning for next school year. When it comes to collaboration and instruction, a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that, our parents are professionals. They have backgrounds. They have living experiences that could really contribute to the learning. And so one thing, we all talk about parent involvement, but give those surveys in the beginning of the school year. Find out what the professions of your parents are, what sort of life experiences may they have. So as you start planning for lessons, you're able to tap into the parents for expertise or for resources. That's been really fulfilling for me personally when the teacher reaches out and they say, hey, like, we know that you've done X, Y, and Z. Do you have any resources or information to share? As a classroom teacher, that second bullet, I always assign tasks for my students to go back and take home and gather input from their family. That's just a quick way. And again, when we talk about the digital tools, if you're not using a learning management system, I strongly suggest you consider one, but also digital portfolios. This allows for the students and parents to track the progress and highlight the things that are going well. It's keeping everything in one place, that you're not fumbling through papers in a homework folder. The digital portfolio keeps everything together so you can really see how your student is learning and growing. And then when it comes to instruction, on the compassion side, consider stressors when assessing student performance. We are going to be coming out of a COVID year into a post-pandemic environment, and kids are going to be coming to us naturally with some stressors. But we need to be considerate as to why they may not be performing up to speed and what some of those stressors may be. It might be they didn't have any extracurricular for a year and a half, and now their mom has overloaded them and they're in soccer and in band and choir all at one time. Or also the kids' learning style. I know little Philip, I learned during the pandemic that he really enjoys the isolation of the computer and digital learning. And going back to the campus, he has some anxieties about it. And so I need to consider that if I see his performance sort of not be where it should be. And again, with the technology, figure out your features, tap into those teachers or professionals around you that are really good at the technology, and find ways to really reach out to parents. Again, immersive readers and translated text, if you have parents that don't speak English, that has been critically important in our district. And we got a lot of feedback from parents saying that they appreciated assignments being able to do the translations or the immersive readers.
And Chastity, I'm just going to pop in here. You're about halfway through your time.
Thanks, Becca. This is my favorite part. The idea that we cannot tackle instruction until we truly care and develop relationships with our students, right? Meeting their hierarchy of needs before we get into instruction. Again, I talk about the fact that we're coming back into a new normal, so to speak. And kids are going to have all sorts of experiences coming into the classroom next school year. We need to make sure that we care for them as people and cultivate that environment of caring and loving nature before we start trying to fulfill any learning gaps that students may have. We know that they may have learning gaps and a variety of learning gaps, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we put the child first before we start trying to chip away at those standards. So that takes me to my SEL and behavior supports. For the sake of time, you all have these, so I'll kind of talk about them in buckets, right? When we talk about social emotional learning, that's the SEL component. Again, that's getting to the heart of our students, taking the time to truly build relationships, not only with the students, but with the parents. That is critically important. One of the things that I strongly suggest is at the beginning of the school year, give them as much information as they can possibly have. We know we give them the rules and the classroom expectations and the bell schedule in the beginning of the school year folders, but up the ante a little bit and really request information from the parent about their children. What are their likes, their dislikes? What are some positive experiences they've had at school this year or the previous year, or specifically during the pandemic year? That is all going to be critical information for you to be able to use to build a relationship with your students. Also, inform your parents of any sort of strategies or techniques that you use to regulate behavior. Give you an example. When Philip was in kindergarten, he's always had a really tough time, asking for clarification. He doesn't understand something, he completely shuts down. His auditory processing is a little bit slower because he's focused on everything around him. And I noticed that early on, but I just didn't have a strategy other than saying, Philip, you need to ask for help. Well, his teacher recognized that the same issue, and she reached out to me and said, I'm noticing that Philip is, not that he's being defiant, but he doesn't really follow directions, and I'm wondering if he's having a hard time processing the directions. And I said, I think so. Is there something that we can do? And so she started the practice of creating anchor charts for standard routines in the classroom, which most people already have. But in addition to the anchor chart, she would give Philip a sentence stem. And I noticed he started to come home and he'd say, Mom, I need more clarification, please. And then he'd even do the little finger. And I'd say, like, okay, what do you need? And then he would follow up with another sentence stem. And I saw him progressively get better and better at advocating for himself. So that was really important because, no one wants to see their kindergartner completely shut down because they missed a small step in the instructions. When it comes to collaborating, again, bring the parents into the classroom. If you haven't used respect agreements, I strongly encourage you to do a quick Google search on a respect agreement. Have parents co-construct respect agreements with their students and have the kids bring them to class before you create your own classroom respect agreement. That's a way, again, for the parents to be aware and informed about what's taking place in the classroom. Again, allow the parents that avenue to really be a part of the classroom environment. Seek out their expertise and wherever you can, whenever you can. And then lastly, keep in mind, again, I mentioned it earlier, parents are the experts of their kids, but they might not be the experts in truly, handling the social emotional aspects of their child as a student. And so we need to encourage them and provide them with some structures in place. Again, having some sentence stems to use with Philip was super helpful. I never would have thought of that on my own as a parent. When I put my teacher hat on, it made all the sense in the world, right? And again, do check-ins. We talked previously, Becca and I were talking ahead of this about the concept of home visits. And, my son had 2 home visits from his teacher during the school year. And that was critically important because it really, really increased his encouragement and motivation to do well because he felt like the teacher was a real part of his life. And my God, my teacher knows where I live, right? If you have a neighborhood school concept, I strongly encourage you to consider home visits or even just making yourself visible in the community outside of the physical school building when at all possible. And that sort of is a natural segue into the third component, which is culture, right? Being a part, again, that facilitating that community feeling where it's not just, oh, school is a place where I bring my kids as a glorified institution of childcare. More so, this is part of my life and me and as a parent creating a whole child, right? And so again, communication, especially when facilitating culture. I speak to culture a lot because in Fort Bend Independent School District, we are demographically one of the most diverse, ethnically diverse school districts in the nation and diverse counties in the nation. It is a beautiful sight to see, but there are still some struggles with making that classroom and community connection, just based off of lack of interaction and exposure. So communication. One of the things I strongly suggest is make culture a main characteristic of your campus or your classroom. Be open and share your background and your culture with your students to sort of facilitate that cultural pride When students feel proud of who they are, they're more likely to share with others. If you are all about inclusive practices, let that be known in the very beginning. So parents, they know that we are going to be reading books from diverse writers. We're going to be engaged in strategies that really challenge my children's point of view on issues. Let that be known early on to the parents. And then lastly, know your population. I keep saying survey. Surveys are awesome because you get to know your audience. You get to gather information about languages spoken at home, cultural practices, traditions, etc. And you can use all of that as you plan ahead. Again, when it comes to collaboration through the lens of culture, encourage families to really bring their culture into the campus. We have cultural libraries where families donate books and resources or posters or flags. We have some of our campuses that have flags from countries around the world because they ask the parents to bring flags in. And that's a beautiful sight to see. Again, something as simple as posting images of students and their families in the classroom to show diversity and to really foster that inclusive community environment is really important. And lastly, especially when dealing with multiple backgrounds, ethnicities, we can't always assume that lack of parental participation is because they don't care. All parents care about their children. And so sometimes there's barriers, whether it's a transportation barrier, whether it's a language barrier, a financial barrier, because they may have just moved here and haven't necessarily gotten on their feet. We need to be considerate of that and follow up and stay persistent. We can't just write it off as, oh, well, these parents don't particularly care. Tap into, that compassion zone and really try to seek out the rationale behind why. When delving into sensitive topics, again, I'm in Texas, and so we know we have a wide range of spectrums on all topics out here. It's important that you let parents know ahead of time, provide them, again, resources and prompts to help their students engage in conversations outside of the classroom and at home. Always provide multiple perspectives when possible, where warranted. The fact that everyone has a different set of backgrounds and beliefs in mind should be taken into account, especially, again, from a social studies lens. You want to make sure that we're always providing facts and research to back up our information. And then lastly, be a proponent of anti-bias, anti-racist curriculum in the classroom. That is where the rubber meets the road, and we're able to truly let our parents know that we care about our students, and we're going to make sure that they see themselves in their learning. We're going to make sure they have examples of diverse representation in their learning. We're going to make them feel part of the curriculum, so to speak. And so that's really important and something that we've seen a lot of trends moving towards, and I think we can only get better at this point. And so this brings us in talking about parents, to wrap up about parents, I have 3 quotes. If you go back to Minty Meter, there are 3 quotes, and quote 1, quote 2, quote 3. I'm going to give you a chance to go back into Minty Meter. I'll actually have to move the slide for you. And I will give you an opportunity I'm going to share again. Okay. To read the quote, and it's on the handout as well, and respond to the quote that most resonates to you. I can put the quotes back up for you. All right. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to read quote 1. Give another 30 seconds to get through the rest, and then I'll change the Minty Meter slide and allow you the opportunity to pick which quote. And in the Q&A, we'll kind of talk about which quote you selected and why. Awesome. Another 10 seconds. All right. Well, thank you all for oh, we're still moving. Another 10 seconds. Wow, we leveled out quite a bit towards the end. I'll come back to the Minty Meter results in our Q&A to see if anything has changed. All right, Brian, if you can make sure that we have a new share, be able to see it.
Yep, that's good.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so now let's talk about community a little bit. Because this is the area that a lot of times, you know, as teachers or as campus leaders, we sort of get into the thick of, you know, day-to-day operation, day-to-day teaching and learning, and we lose sight of the fact that the school is an integral part of the community as a whole, and that there are external folks outside of the school who are willing to come in and help. And again, we can't just rely on the school district or, you know, the state education agency or even our local education agencies to take complete ownership of classroom success. We sort of need to tap into our own local communities to really nurture our schools and provide for our community needs. Again, when families and community groups, businesses all work together, we're able to support learning so that way our young people have what they need in school. And we've seen research where wherever we see sort of a community school environment, you know, kids typically stay in school longer and they have a more enjoyable school environment. In our school district, it's a very large school district in Texas. By Texas standards, we have about 77,000 students. And the district is very, very large. I believe it, you know, it might be the size of a small state. It's pretty big. It takes me approximately an hour plus to go from one side of the school district to the other, just driving straight with no traffic. And so we're fortunate enough that in our district, my department that I work in is called Collaborative Communities. So what we saw was that the community really wanted to engage with the school district to provide us with some support. And so our district has allowed, you know, that sort of to be formalized by having a department that does so. I'm going to give you examples from when I was a classroom teacher before I even knew that collaborative communities was a thing. And so in collaborative communities are what do community partners provide? How about that? What do community partners provide? So in our school district, there are some key fundamental things that our community partners help to provide, and they are not all financial sort of donations. For one, food insecurities. We have a wide spectrum of socioeconomic status in our school district, and we saw, especially during the pandemic, that food insecurity was a thing. And so we've been able to tap into our community partners to help us remedy food insecurities and create campus-based food pantries or campus-based clothing corners for kids to be able to have clothes or resources. We have one campus that has washing machines for kids to be able to, you know, take care of their needs, all donated by the community. We have resource supply. I can remember being a middle school teacher and needing paper, and not just plain white paper. I wanted fun paper. And I recall that, you know, driving on my way to school, there was like a print shop, an old gentleman who made invitations and stationery. And one day I stopped by and I said, you know, I'm a teacher at the school. And if you happen to ever have scrap paper, I would be so happy to receive it. And when I tell you, I received more paper than what I knew what to do with in that few years at that particular school. It was a great experience, and my kids always knew that they had whatever they need, and our projects were always very, very colorful and sparkly. Technology support. We tap into our tech companies and our tech specialists out the district to provide technology support for us. Now, during the pandemic, we received lots of donations of technology to be able to make sure our students had access, and that's also extremely important. And so when in doubt, seek them out. And lastly, guest speakers. This is the part that I really enjoy because this kind of goes beyond career day, but actually bringing community members into the classroom to assist with instruction. And I'll elaborate a little bit about that. And so in developing community partners, again, in thinking about communication from that first lens of communication, what we want to do, we want to make sure that communication is two-way with our community partners. We want to make sure that we provide them with information the same way we provide parents with information that's timely, so that way they're aware of the campus goals and campus priorities. They want to be of assistance. They just, a lot of times they just don't know about it. So making sure that our community partners actually get newsletters and updates and emails is really important. If you're doing something cool in your classroom, I remember I taught US history, and I was having a colonial marketplace where kids were gonna pull a food item or a actual item out of a hat, and then they have to go and bring it into the classroom. And I knew very well that some of my students probably couldn't afford to go out and buy things. So I worked with the local grocery store and I said, hey, I'm doing a colonial marketplace and here's the list. Would you be willing to A, make it convenient for my kids to find these items, and B, be able to provide some resources in the event they can't afford the items? And the grocery store was lovely about it. They actually pulled the items together. They told kids to come in at a certain time. And they even gave them a discount on the items to be able to participate in the colonial marketplace. And that didn't take a lot of work. It was just me as a teacher going to the grocery store in the neighborhood where I worked and asking for a little bit of support. And they were more than honored to do so. Collaboration. Again, bring the curriculum into the community and the community into the curriculum. The same way I mentioned bringing parents, tapping into the expertise of the parents. Again, tap into the expertise of the community. Center the learning around real world experiences. If you're teaching geometry and kids are having to learn about geometry in the setting where they are, you know, what better way to learn about geometry than asking a civil engineer about roads and bridges, right? And so again, bringing in the community to really expand upon the curriculum topics. Bring in experts. Again, we no longer have to be the experts. We can bring in experts to help enhance the curriculum, especially if you're a new teacher and there's a topic that you're like, man, I'm going to have to do a lot of reading on this topic, a lot of YouTubing on this topic. Don't feel the pressure of having to be the expert. You can tap into the community to bring in an expert to help talk about the topics that you're discussing. When it comes to compassion, in the event that you're dealing with topics that are sensitive in nature, bring in the community. I know for one, we've held several town hall sort of events or forums when we had world history teachers talking about religion, and they knew, you know, we want to make sure that we get this right. We don't want to make any assumptions about religions, especially ones we're not familiar with. So what do? They reached out to leaders of interfaith groups to create a panel. And not only was the panel available for parents, but and for students, right? And so it was more of a community engagement event that we ultimately were able to insert into the curriculum. And so again, tap into your resources. Allow the community to have a space in your school. Again, creating a community resource board. If you have community members who want to partner and want to provide a safe space, whether it's the counselor's office or in the front office, where you can have brochures and flyers and things of that nature for your parents to have access to, and for your students to know that those services or items are available. That was a whole lot of information, but again, I have the wrap up in the PDF, but I want to close with a reflection as we segue into the Q&A. And so again, I kind of switched the questions just a bit for a closing perspective, with question 1 saying, what are some practices that you could incorporate based off of anything you heard, or maybe it kind of set off a light bulb that you can incorporate to engage parents, families as partners in learning? And then what are some practices that you can incorporate to engage your community as partners in learning? And so I'll go ahead, and I think we have 2 minutes, right, Becca, to wrap up with this, and then we'll jump into the Q&A link.
Exactly. Yep.
Perfect.
And Chastity, I don't know if you saw the question that popped up in the chat. So there was a request for the link for presentation slides. Is that a doable thing for? Okay.
So it is, but all of the information is on the handout for Diana. Like literally, the handout is a duplicate of the slides, with the exception of like my bio slide, and a few of just the images. But I'm more than willing to share as well, Becca.
Okay, perfect, excellent. We will coordinate that and have that on the Academy site for everyone. All right, and Chastity, did you want to follow up here before I transition everyone as they're finishing up their thoughts on their two questions?
I'm good. I'm always like, I'm the chat junkie. I go straight to the chat. So I'm reading all the comments, and I thank you all for the feedback in the comments. But I'm ready to transition to the Q&A if you're okay with that.
Excellent. So yeah, before we, have everybody hop on over there, I just wanted to say thank you again to you, Chastity, for sharing with us. Oh, and I just realized, thank you, Brian, for the request. Here I am. Usually it's the mute button that I have trouble with, but just to say thank you again to you for presenting today and really having us, think deeply about what we had before, what we engaged in during the year of the pandemic, and then where we can really, take some amazing things that happened and build off of those. So thank you for your amazing presentation. And as I said before, the link for the discussion room is in the chat. It's also in your email, but we will see everyone over there and can't wait to engage in a